makes us focus on those right angles and it produces this illusion.
Or this
I was
way.
floored. Things like
Yeah.
visual illusions are not universal. What about other phenomena?
Let's turn that.
Yes, what about other
Oh,
phenomena?
okay.
Like
Go this way.
how things smell to us. Joe
Let's
Henderson.
turn.
In some societies,
Too
people
bad.
really attend to scent, and they have a complex set of language terms that have the equivalent of basic color categories for scents. They're able to make finer distinctions in terms of their olfaction, whereas we usually describe a scent by saying something that it smells like.
There are also auditory differences.
Some people grow up speaking languages like Mandarin, where you have to learn to distinguish words just by the tone, and that's going to cultivate certain tonal abilities, which could feed into certain kinds of music and things like that.
No more.
Emmert's next example is more behavioral than physiological. It has to do with conformity.
There's something called the Ash conformity test, where you have confederate to the experiment
ไหนได้
give the same wrong answer to an objective
ยังไม่ได้ใช่ไหม
and then you see how often the
Same time,
subject
right?
wants to go along with
Yeah.
other people as opposed to give the answer they would give if they were by themselves.
When they're by themselves, the vast majority of people who do this experiment get the right answer, like in this archival tape of an Ash conformity test. Great. But then the experimenters' confederates come along.
But on the third trial, something happens. Two. The subject denies the evidence of his own eyes and yields to group influence.
When Americans did this experiment, a third of them conformed and gave an obviously wrong answer. The same experiment was done in other non-weird countries like Zimbabwe and Japan.
If you go to other societies, people are much more willing to give the same wrong
Don't
answer to
bite
go
at me.
along with others.
It turns out
That's
that
right.
Americans were among the least likely
This
to
one.
conform.
Yep.
Relatedly,
These,
Americans place a
these,
high
these.
value on being consistent across different situations.
You want to be the same self, regardless of who you're talking to or what context you're in. Whereas in other places, it seems to be okay to morph and shift your personality depending on your context.
So the picture that emerges from these findings is that Americans are less likely to conform in the name of social harmony, and we also treasure being consistent, expressing our true selves, regardless of the context. If you wanted to reduce this to a slogan of Americanism, it might be something like, I am me, deal with it. This fits quite snugly with the fact that the U.S. has been found to be the most individualistic culture in the world. We may not be the very loosest culture, but we are number one in individualism. Which doesn't mean egoism, but it could go that way. It means I did it my way. This man has proof of our individualism. We met him earlier, but just briefly. Here's proper introduction.
My name is Gert-Jan Hofstede. I'm a professor of artificial sociality at Wageningen University in the Netherlands.
The study of culture is a family business for Hofstede. His late father was a social psychologist who devised a system to rank countries on several dimensions, including their level of individualism versus collectivism.
In an individualistic society, a person is like an atom in a gas. It can freely float about, and life is an adventurous, then you can become as yourself. And in a collectivistic society, a person is like an atom in the crystal. Whether proud or whether happy or not, it has a position of sustainer.
On the next episode of Freakonomics Radio, Hofstede will guide us through the other dimensions of sociality that will pinpoint the ways in which the U.S. is an outlier among the nations of the world. And we'll devote future episodes to how these differences affect policy. Hear about the resources devoted to child poverty,
The United States spends about 1% of GDP on family benefits. France spends 3.5%.
how the U.S. approach to policing is different from other countries.
Some of the old timers said, why the hell did we shoot him?
We'll hear why our infrastructure, particularly our transportation infrastructure, is so atypical.
Love it or hate it, there will never be another country in the world that is more auto-oriented than the United States.
And, of course, we will hear about the American economy, perhaps the outlier to end all outliers. To hold you over till then, we'll leave you with a patriotic tribute from one last transplanted U.S. comedian.
When was that moment that America became the most American America it could possibly be?
John Oliver.